So we're thrilled to have you here today. Good morning. My name is Andrew Vidor. I'm our Director of Studies here in Colorado. I've been with Walker Consultants for 17 years and lead our planning practice here in the Rocky Mountain region and the desert Southwest. We have a great team in our Colorado office. There's about 25 of us here in Colorado. Nationwide, Walker Consultants has over 20 offices and is supported by more than 325 architects, engineers, planners, financial analysts, and policy specialists. We've been in Colorado serving this market, the Rocky Mountain region and the desert Southwest, for 41 years. We just celebrated our 41st anniversary a few weeks ago and have some exciting news. We've been serving the Arizona market, the Valley of the Sun, for the last 41 years out of our Denver office. And actually, as we speak, Anirudh Chopre, who is one of our senior project managers and has been serving the Arizona market for many years, is relocating there. So we will be opening an office physically in the Phoenix Valley July 1st. So we're thrilled to be able to serve you directly from Arizona. We know that that's important to you and are excited to be working with you there directly. So I'll let Mallory, who also is a panelist on today's webinar, introduce herself.
Thanks, Andrew, and good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us today. It's really wonderful to see so many familiar names in the attendee list. I know many of you, but for those who don't know me yet, my name is Mallory Baker. I've been with Walker for about 5 years now and been in planning for about a decade. I focus primarily on our municipal practice, and I'm hugely passionate about helping communities align their transportation and parking management initiatives with big, broad community goals around economic vitality and social equity and climate and sustainability. And I also manage our public engagement strategy firm-wide. So very excited to talk to you all this morning, and thanks again for your time.
So today is an investment for yourself and an investment of your time and your community's time. And we want to make sure that you can walk away with valuable information. So there's 3 primary objectives that we want you to walk away from with your time today. The first is we want this to be interactive and engaging, and we have a really cool tool called Mentimeter that we're going to engage with you to learn more about you, to understand where you are in your parking management goals and objectives and aspirations. We also want you to learn more about why managing parking can enhance your downtown's economic vibrancy and vitality. We think that that is critical for your communities. In most cases, no one goes anywhere just to park, right? They're going there for a destination, and access and mobility is critically important, and we're going to talk more about that today. But also, we want to share some strategies and some community success stories in where this is being done elsewhere. They might be your peers, they might be an aspirational city, but there are real concrete examples of where that happens. If you have an example you want to share, we'd love to hear it from you as well. And if you have follow-up questions, there will be an opportunity today to talk more with us about that. Otherwise, you're absolutely welcome to reach out to Mallory or I or anyone else on our team to help talk more about your community and questions you might have about your economic vibrancy. So at Walker Consultants, we're really passionate. Mallory is an extremely passionate person about what she does, and so am I. But as a company, our focus and goals really is not about parking and mobility and access. It's about making it easier for people to reach their destinations. Again, no one rides their bike just to a destination for the destination's sake, right? They want to go do something once they've arrived. The same thing goes if you're parking and driving there or walking. We want to make it easy for you to reach that destination. And it's important because we want to focus on supporting mode choice and transportation mode choice. We know that vehicle access is only one of many transportation mode choices. Others include walking, biking, micro mobility, such as scooters, bike share, electric bikes. downtown circulators, or the local bus transportation network. So we want to make sure that there's equity and options in supporting that mode choice. And part of that leads to creating a parking and transportation system that's optimized and has convenient access for all of those different users. So if you choose to ride the bus today, it's going to be convenient. And there's great ways to be able to do that and make it seamless. And that's important for all the users in the transportation network, not just your customers, not just your employees or residents, but everyone using the transportation system. If we do those things, we can improve the quality of the lives of everyone in our community and encourage economic growth. And economic growth and vibrancy is critically important for our small business owners, our restaurants, our retailers, and other merchants in our downtowns, so their lives can flourish as well. And then lastly, we focus on plans that are implementable and work for people, work for the users and the consumers. We love to have great planning documents that have aspirational goals, but we believe it's absolutely critical that they're implementable for your community and are meeting the goals and objectives that you need for you. So let's talk about this engagement and talk about Mentimeter. If you pull up your phone or your tablet or pull up another web page on your computer and go to menti.com, my colleague here, Drew Wilsey, one of our planners here, is going to switch screens for the first two questions. So when you go to menti.com, you're going to need to use a unique code. And that code here is at the top of the screen. It's 4252 2089. Again, type in the code 4252 2089. And we have two questions that we want to start out with to learn more about who's joining us today. So the first question is if you could type in the city, the county, the town, where you reside, or what municipal agency you are affiliated with, we can see who's joining us here today. And again, I'd expect that there's probably quite a few mountain communities that are joining us, as well as a fair number of cities in the Arizona Valley. So we have people represented from Durango and Chandler and Denver and Frisco, Colorado. Our friends in Bozeman, Montana are here today. Downtown Denver Partnership, the city of Provo, corporations here, Mesa, Arizona, Santa Fe, New Mexico. So quite a wide diversity of people that are joining us today. For those of us that know you, we're excited to see you again. For those that have not met, thanks for joining us today. So again, you'll see there's quite a bit of variety in folks that are here today, coming from as far as Memphis and Richmond, California. So thanks for joining us. The second question really focuses on understanding more about your community and whether or not you believe your community actively manages parking today. And that can come in a wide variety of aspects in management. It could be something as simple as time limits. It could include paid parking and enforcement. So out of the 13 respondents that we have so far, 100% of you actively manage parking. So that could come in a lot of different ways. And we're going to spend some time talking today about what active parking management is. And so it's more than just paid parking or time limited parking.
We're getting some no's in here too, Andrew. So some people
there
just
are
starting out on their journey
that don't active manage parking, and that's okay. We'll talk more about what that means today. So we'll switch back over to the slide deck presentation and get back into where we're at. We're also joined today by one of our production team members, Ryan Griffin-Stedjic. Ryan is in our marketing department and is going to be monitoring the chat. So if you have questions, please ask. We will stop where we're at and talk more with you about your questions. So, what does managed parking do? And, why is it important? Again, it's more about just getting the vehicle between those two white lines or two yellow lines in your community. And we want to make sure that we're managing access for everyone and that we're not just focusing on one particular user group because the number of users, varies significantly. And it can include a wide range of constituents depending on your community. Certainly, employees in your downtown are an important group that we want to make sure that we provide access for. Your customers are important because without our customers, our restaurants, our retailers, and our other businesses won't have anybody shopping or dining with them. Downtown residents are also an important user group. Their needs vary depending on the size and type of community that we're working with. If you are in a college town, our college students and our professors and faculty need to be considered. And so a good parking management strategy will address all of the access needs for all parkers. And it prioritizes them differently. We want to make sure that we're prioritizing customer access in front of businesses and with close walking proximity. They're going to be there for shorter lengths of time. We want to make sure their walks are convenient. Whereas an employee, on the other hand, that's going to be serving a business that's there for an 8-hour shift might not need to have front door access. But there very well may be needs for them to have managed access for deliveries and if they're loading and unloading their vehicles with supplies. So we treat all of the users in equity, but all of the users need to have a little bit different prioritization so we can make sure that the access needs for our customers are focused on. And that's important from an economic vitality perspective because without our customers, our business owners don't have a livelihood. And so if we provide good access to our customers, we can increase merchant revenues, and increased merchant revenues directly affects our communities by growing sales tax. If you're in a community that relies on sales tax or use tax in some cases, ultimately what that will do is increase tax value and the tax base in your communities. And you as communities and economic development arms or economic development entities, depending on your organizational structure, can utilize those additional monies to reinvest in your community. And reinvesting in your community can come in a lot of different ways. It can be to provide better access to the pedestrian walking experience and increasing sidewalk space, green space. It can also let you invest in additional infrastructure to make your communities more walkable or more bike friendly. You can also reinvest those monies in your parking program and in your mobility programs to make sure that they're sustainable and are capable of supporting the cost to operate and maintain them. And again, the reason for operating and maintaining them goes back to access and equity access for those users, which drives merchant revenue. Customer access and business vitality is another really important piece in the process. We want to make sure that our communities and our downtowns are accessible from a wide variety of transportation modes. Vehicles, again, is only one of them, and we believe in a holistic approach to customer access. So recognizing that while vehicle access is important, if we can have a park once philosophy in a community that's accessible, we're not moving vehicles around as often. And so if we can reduce the vehicle trips, we can reduce traffic congestion, we can reduce vehicle emissions, which for our mountain communities, we understand and know is critically important to air quality. As well as, even here in the Front Range, we have air quality issues that we want to manage and mitigate. In the desert Southwest or in Tennessee and California, we understand that's also important. And so if we can provide mode choice by getting people out of their cars and having walkable and bikeable communities, we can have good access. We also need to make sure that our customers and our employees have the technology that provides not only the information that they need to make good choices in their access, but also allowing them to be able to access those different choices from convenient locations. And so mobility hub integration and parking integration and transit integration into streamlined unified platforms is important, because if the customer has all of the different mode choices and the ways they can access it and pay for it, if payments required, and the schedule at their fingertips, they're more likely to use those different mode choices and mode choices that might not be as familiar to them. But if they're not able to access those conveniently, the choice is going to be difficult for them to make. The other piece that's important for business vitality is to be able to manage turnover. And managing turnover is important for our businesses that need shorter duration of stay access for their guests. Somebody that's going to be picking up a cup of coffee or making a quick 15-minute stop to pick up their online order, whether that's food or other retail goods. And so we can do and manage parking turnover with time limits, with enforcements and paid parking. Now, each of these strategies are effective strategies in managing turnover, and we'll talk more about later, how you move from one step to the next and what we call a transitional approach, but also the ways that we manage turnover is different and unique for different communities. Communities that have a higher tax base or other paid parking infrastructure. Paid parking is one way to do that. The city of Fort Collins, for example, uses paid parking to manage access and turnover, as does the city and county of Denver. There are communities like the town of Breckenridge up in the mountains of Colorado that uses paid parking to manage turnover, and they reinvest that money in their parking program. Other communities like Frisco, Colorado, for example, currently don't have a paid parking program, and they use some time limits to manage some of the turnover in some of their key downtown cores. Communities in Arizona, some choose to pay for parking, others don't. So again, not a right or wrong answer to this, but really it starts with some goal setting and identifying what strategies are most appropriate for your community to make sure that that access and business vitality is a focus.
So Andrew talked about a lot of the kind of day-to-day tools that people use to align their parking management efforts with economic vitality. But now we're going to talk about how we can espouse economic vitality in our parking regulations, so in ordinance and policy. I'm sure many of you are familiar with typical use-based parking requirements for new development, where new development is required to provide parking based on the uses in their development programming in an additive way. The good news there is that it's really simple, very simple to implement, very simple for people to understand. And you have a lot of precedent. A lot of communities do their off-street parking requirements that way. The bad news is generally use-based parking requirements are not aligned with actual parking demand, market-generated parking needs. You tend to overbuild and in some cases, perhaps underbuild. Generally, use-based parking requirements aren't conducive for a smart, holistic, integrative parking planning approach. And finally, those types of parking requirements aren't generally tailored to your community. Maybe they're copy and pasted from another community. Maybe they're generated from the Urban Land Institute or Institute of Transportation Engineers parking ratios, but they don't reflect the richness of your community, the denseness of your downtown cores, the transit and pedestrian and bike access that you have in your community. So we like to think of a couple of principles when thinking about how to help communities have economically vital, robust, contextual off-street parking requirements. Namely, they should be flexible, providing a lot of different options and flexible for individual developers to take advantage of. Secondly, the policy should be set by elected officials. It should be right for your community, but it should be administered administratively by staff, by the people that do the work on a day-to-day basis. It should be contextual. It should reflect the actual conditions on the ground in your community. And finally, parking requirements should espouse the fact that no project is an island. People don't build buildings in a vacuum where no one else can access. the property, and it doesn't reflect, the overall context of the area. So allowing for things like off-site parking, shared parking, area-wide or district-wide considerations for parking resources are all hugely important. There are many communities that are already doing this, and some of them are even on this call. One example I love is the community of Sedona, Arizona. They allow administrative reductions up to 100% for new development, and they allow shared parking both within a project and district-wide, taking advantage of underutilized parking in an area or in a district. So it really allows for this integrative approach that bolsters economic vitality and allows for the park once type of policies that we all want to create. So going over to the other side of this slide here, so development incentives, we frequently get asked the question, can parking be used to incentivize development? If they build it, will they come? Yeah, in some cases, think about how expensive structured parking is to build. It costs tens of thousands of dollars per space in many communities, many of your communities. And we've heard of projects where parking killed the project. The project was never built. These wonderful mixed use projects, very ambitious, very design oriented, were never built because of parking. So if a community has the capital to build its own parking, it can offer huge benefits. You can take control of the parking system. You can manage it the way you want to be managed to meet your goals. And also you can allow new development to use those public parking resources instead of providing their own parking. So that is a huge incentive for developers, and also a major incentive for communities. Some key principles to keep in mind here. Financial contribution is really important. Parking is really expensive to operate and maintain. It's also very expensive to build, and it's expensive to build new parking, even once you already have it. So some financial contribution for developers who are taking advantage of this option is hugely important. We talk frequently about in lieu fees, which are generally set in association with the cost of replacement for a structured parking space. So that's where developers pay this in lieu fee contribution in lieu of paying or building their own required parking. But there are other alternatives that are more associated with maintaining operations and maintenance carrying costs of the parking system rather than replacement costs, which are of course tens of thousands of dollars versus just hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars per year. Secondly, you'd have the most leverage here with commercial new builds. So things like retail, things like office that can integrate easily into a public parking system rather than residential developments, which typically need their own parking to function. Next slide. Thanks, Andrew. So we talked about, a number of ways to fund a parking system. In lieu fees, developer contributions are some options, but there are many different options for funding public parking systems. The benefits here of a community, taking control of its public parking system are many. Some of them are, you can manage this public parking system in the way that you want to meet your goals, whether those are economic vitality, social equity, transportation demand management, climate initiatives. The benefits are huge. You can also create a park once environment. And, it's really almost impossible to create park once environments when you have everyone providing their own parking in a downtown core. Humans drive places. They like to get places quickly and conveniently. So expecting someone to park once when there's a plethora of parking available at all of their destinations is really challenging. And what we've seen over our years is that walking communities are economically vital communities. You have people popping into businesses that they weren't expecting to go in, getting them out of their cars and experiencing your downtown. I won't touch on examples for each of these, but some examples I did want to mention how communities fund their parking systems. One example is the city of Santa Fe, New Mexico. I see some friends from Santa Fe on this call today. Santa Fe has a parking enterprise fund, meaning that its parking system is self-sustaining, right? So that's a great initiative to take. You want your parking system to not pull from your general fund, but rather fund itself. And their enterprise fund primarily pulls from end user payments. So paid parking, meters, off-street parking payments, parking violation fines. And it actually does generate some net revenue, which can be reinvested. It pays for operations and maintenance of the parking system, debt service, new capital funding, and it can even fund some transportation demand management initiatives. Another example I wanted to call out is the lovely city of Boulder. I see some folks from there too. Boulder has a number of general improvement districts. One of them is the Boulder Junction Access Districts. They have both parking and transportation demand management components. That's funded through a property tax assessment, and it can fund public improvements related to transportation and parking, as well as parking management and transportation demand management initiatives like bike share, EcoPass, et cetera. So I think Andrew's going to talk a little bit about implementation, how you take the next step.
Yeah, so I recognize there might be some fear in this and in your communities, and that's okay. I can tell you that you're not alone, and you're certainly not the first community that has had to make some of these big decisions, many of which are political, frankly, and the political aspiration to make these changes is difficult. The unique thing about parking is that everybody that has a driver's license and a vehicle has an opinion about it, and their opinions vary widely, and everybody wants that spot out front, which is different in a planning process than some of the other kinds of projects that your communities might work with. And so, I encourage you to start small and take a transitional approach. It's okay to move from a completely unmanaged system to a marginally managed system if there's a plan in place. And Mallory will talk about in a few minutes the kind of different phases in managed parking and managed transportation access. But if we start by setting some goals and what we're trying to achieve, and in some communities, it's going to be very different than others. Some of those goals might be, we just need to get the employees out of the front door so our customers can access our businesses. Others might be, we need to generate revenue to reinvest in our community by providing better access by other means, by investing in more bike infrastructure, more pet infrastructure. And so once we set those goals of the why we need to manage parking and why it's important, we can start talking with our community and generating a shared vision and talking with our elected officials and our other departments within our communities to develop that shared vision. And that shared vision is important at all of those different levels, because we need to make sure that there's consensus and understanding. And even if there's not consensus, the communication and education about the importance of what we're trying to do and why we're trying to do it, we find is probably one of the most important things. And through education and community outreach, we find that educating those constituents on the reasons behind the why becomes one of the most effective ways for our communities and our departments and elected officials to take that next step and to be able to react. And an implementation plan, an implementation phase, goes back to starting small and taking that transitional approach. Your end game may be very different than where you are today, but taking that first step is sometimes the hardest step. And I'm thinking of a community here in Colorado, the city of Brighton, that was by all stretches largely unmanaged. And they decided that they wanted to take that step so they could reinvest into their community. And so their plan starts with managing parking and managing the time limits and managing the turnover with enforcement, but through an educational program about why the city wants to now manage their parking. And then eventually they may move into a paid parking model so they can reinvest, but right now they're using their tax dollars to invest in that. But making sure that that implementation plan has the steps necessary for success. Again, community outreach and education and teaching people about what the program is intended to do is critically important step. But also once you start to deploy the tactics and strategies, whether it's paid parking, time limited parking, just enforcing it, or implementing new micro mobility forms, is making sure that you're graceful with your communities and your constituents. You want to go out there and start by educating the violator. A lot of times we find that violators are just uneducated. And so if we can teach them about the policies and the procedures and what's new and why, they're far more likely to comply. And I think the other piece of that communication and this generating the shared vision with the community focuses on helping people understand that we go back to those goals and common themes about managing access from an equity perspective and creating access for all of those different users and making sure that all of the different users, whether you're a resident, a business owner, or employee, why we're trying to help manage the system and how it works for them, not just why it doesn't work for them and why their habits need to change. I think one of the things that we've learned through resiliency in the last year is that people are adaptable. People can make change. It takes a little bit of work, but humans, I think, are generally good at doing those sorts of things if they understand some of the important reasons why. So that's kind of the steps that we might look at to move towards a managed parking system, whether it's unmanaged today or maybe you're somewhere in between a highly managed system. And Mallory will talk more about that. But I think one of the key takeaways is regardless of the size of your community, you can be anywhere on that scale and spectrum.
Yeah, so frequently when people approach us about curb management or parking management, they jump right to 7 over here. So they think it's kind of like a really tech focused, tech heavy, sexy kind of endeavor. But really most of the communities that we work with are kind of on this first end of the spectrum. They're just starting to allocate the public right of way and distinguish between the public right of way and private property. They might be starting to begin to enforce time limits and rules and regulations in their right of way to further distinguish between what is private and what is public. And they might just be trying to allocate the right of way appropriately to different modes, from parking to bikes and pedestrians to transit to even public space. And I think COVID really showed us that the importance of that public space and the importance of making it work for your community. We saw many communities start to allocate that public right of way to things like extending cafes into the sidewalk or parklets or just ways to use that space for other means. And it's really important to talk to someone who can help you figure out what the impacts might be and start to figure out what that next step might be for you. And I'll also say that there are a lot of really amazing things that you can do with parking management that you can do with low capital, not a lot of money, and not a lot of tech. So recently we've been talking to a lot of communities who are interested in demand-based pricing. They've done paid parking, but they're interested in maybe having a little bit more nuance and a little bit more sophistication in how they distribute parking demand with their paid parking. And what we're hearing from these communities is, well, we can't actually do that because it requires so much upfront capital and all these sensors and all this staff to make it happen. And what we say is, you can do this. There are ways to do this in the way that fits with your budget, fits within your community and your staff capability, that don't require that you spend millions and millions of dollars on sensors that will give you, an exact understanding of who's in what spaces at what time. So no matter where you are on the scale, there's a next right step for you to take control of your parking system. It's a huge piece of real estate, a huge piece of property that you're managing if you're managing parking. And we're just so passionate about making sure that you do it right and in the way that meets your goals.
I think this is a good opportunity to transition, Mallory. One of the second questions that we asked was, do these communities manage parking? And it was a yes or no answer. And that's a broad question, right? We start looking at these 7 different kind of phases of management. And so it could include a lot of different things, as you see now. I'd like to ask a question to the group about, where in your community you are in that process. So, we started with, do you or don't you manage parking? And now this will give you an opportunity to answer some questions that are more focused on what your priorities are. So if you go back to menti.com and type that code in if you've lost it, that code again, if you need to put it back in, is 4252-2089. Again, it's at the top of the screen. So there are 5 different kind of questions here you can answer. One is, we have not yet considered parking management. That probably is going to be for one of the 2 communities that answered no to the question whether they manage it. Otherwise, those communities might be thinking, hey, we're just starting to think about parking management. Others might say we're most focused on enforcing rules and regulations like time limits. So somewhere before a paid parking program for whatever reason. Others might say we're focused and prioritizing on other travel modes. Again, something that we think is critically important, right? This isn't just about the vehicle, and we look at that heavily in our goal setting. And then, the last kind of phase here is we're most focused on ways to monetize parking in the curb. So it looks like a high percentage of our respondents are using enforcing rules and regulations and time limits as their primary strategy of active parking management and managing that transportation network. And there's a few that are just starting to think about parking management. I would guess that that group of communities is probably one of the group of communities that isn't managing parking effectively or highly managing parking today. And then looks like there's one city here that is focused on monetizing the parking in the curb. So one of the takeaways I think that you can learn from this in this question is, it doesn't matter the size of your community that you are, whether you're a small rural town or a big dense metropolitan urban area, you can be all over the place and kind of how you manage that access. And goal setting is probably the next step for some of you that are just starting to think about this and just starting to think about how you can manage access differently and how you can enforce parking. Those of you that are focusing on ways to monetize parking and the curb space, because they go hand in hand. The question to think about is, why is that important, and what would you do with some of those funds? And what are the strategies that are most effective for you to take that next step? For the vast majority of you that says, we are most focused on enforcing rules and regulations, some things you might think about is, well, is that meeting the goals of your community and your access needs in your community? And if the answer is yes, then kind of staying where you're at is okay. There may be some opportunities to tailor those strategies for sure and find kind of the next level up in managing those rules and enforcement. Are there technologies that can help reduce the cost of labor to enforce that? Are there other strategies that you can do to reduce some of your operational costs that aren't technology related with staffing? Mallory, do you have anything to add to this or any comments before we move on to the next question?
Yeah, and I think we'll get some more meat in the next question. But one thing I'll point out is one of the challenges with starting off parking management or maintaining parking management, especially with enforcement where it requires a significant labor effort, is parking doesn't tend to live anywhere, especially in small cities and small towns. The burden of parking, who owns doing the labor that comes with parking management. There's no city department that usually does that. A little bit's in public works, a little bit's in streets, a little bit's in planning, a little bit's here, a little bit's there. So we hear that and see that all the time. And I think that makes it a challenge to, dedicates to enough staff time to actually make the leap to start to do parking management. And then the other thing is, especially like in my work in public and community engagement, is it's an emotional topic. And so taking the leap to parking management means that you're going to get the angry calls and the angry letters and the city councilors who are asking, why are we doing this? And I think now is simultaneously a great time to start thinking about it, and also a challenging time because of the pressures that people felt with the pandemic. So I'm excited to hear more.
Yeah. So let's move to the next question. And this focuses on, when it comes to parking management, and we'll call this transportation management, access management, because again, it's more than just the car between the two white lines. What gets you excited? What are the things that, you wake up about in the middle of the night and go, boy, if I could just like get excited about this one thing. So it might be economic growth for your downtown. It might be improve access for all of those Parker types we talked about, including residents, employees, business owners, or maybe it's kind of education and taking what we've learned today and talking with our elected officials and talking with our constituents, not only in the community, but within our different departments about why, this is important for you.
And I'll say too, like if none of these are sparking excitement, you can tell us what you're excited about in the chat. I'm already seeing some ideas. Smarter use of land. I love that. The opportunity cost of massive amounts of surface parking or structured parking are great. And so better managing what you have instead of jumping right to, hey, let's build more parking. That's a great step to take. And the first step is all about, managing that resource effectively.
Yeah, and I don't think that any of these three answers is right or wrong. And some of these other answers in the chat are super important. One of the things that comes to mind when I see improve access for all Parker types listed as number one out of the 20 folks that have voted is that it tends to lead me to believe that maybe there's some inequities in how access is managed today, and that there might be one group that's prioritized disproportionately, or one group that maybe doesn't have the access they need to be able to park. And so I think what I would suggest is go back and talk amongst your departments about who is it that maybe doesn't have the right amount of access or needs improved access, and how we can make adjustments to some of those other users. Again, so everyone has equitable access, but the way it's accessed might be different. The economic growth coming in at second place is interesting. I think, one of the things that we look at and talk about is how we can continue to have economic vibrancy in our communities and how good access management can be used to support that. It's not going to be the driver, but it can certainly be a catalyst as an attractor or a deterrent. If there's not convenient access for our customers to be able to come into our community and into our businesses, they can go somewhere else. And going somewhere else could be to an adjacent community, the town next door, the city next door, to the big box retailer. And so by taking access management out of the equation because it's managed effectively, that conversation is no longer on the table. So it's one of those things that if we can set it and forget it, and get a good strategy in place, then we can focus on what do we do with the increased tax revenue, with the increased use tax, with the higher property values. Not applicable to California, or sorry, not applicable to Arizona, is tax increment financing that Mallory talked about, and how we can use the increases in the tax base to invest in other programs and other development in our communities. And lastly, I would say, although ranked third, educating your community about the why managed parking is important is a critical piece. And that takes a lot of work. And sometimes they don't want to hear it from you. You could be beating the same drum that others in this industry are beating, but if we talk and educate them from a different perspective, sometimes we find that they can come to resolution with that a little bit easier. And there's a lot of creative ways. Mallory leads our public engagement strategy, and we've found that our online engagement, over the last 12 months has been really beneficial because we're able to access different constituents that otherwise may not have been able to participate in a traditional community engagement platform. And Mallory, maybe you can talk about how that's been effective in reaching those that maybe were either unreachable or not able to be reached previously.
Yeah, I think I can touch on that. First, I'll say that it's no surprise to me that this ranked third. I mean, I think that this is a really daunting process to take on. There's so much emotion around parking and transportation. It's just a really emotional topic for a lot of people. And we work with communities where, you know, they've had decades old programs like resident parking permit programs and no paid parking and no parking management and initiatives or lack of thereof that have really engendered a sense of entitlement over the public right of way and a lack of understanding about the importance of that space to the community and really the real estate value that it offers. For most communities, that's the biggest chunk of real estate, public real estate that you have. So um, that's a huge effort educating your community around that, especially when they're used to the status quo. I think what Andrew's talking about is COVID-19. While hugely impactful and challenging, it was a really transformational time for community engagement, and we were able to use tools like the one that we're using now, and Mural, a digital whiteboard tool, and all the amazing virtual tools at our disposal to really create intentional practices around reaching demographics that we haven't been able to reach in the past with more traditional public engagement efforts like service workers, low-income community members, people of color, senior citizens, youth, people with disabilities, people who just don't tend to participate in public engagement processes when they have to come to open houses or come in person. So yeah, I think it's been pretty incredible. And what I love about this tool and Mural and others that we use it is we're creating something together. So when we're done with this meeting, we have this as kind of evidence of what you shared and what we now know about you, and we can use that moving forward. So yeah, while I wouldn't say it's been the easiest year when it comes to public engagement, we've learned a lot, and I think we'll apply a lot going forward.
I think a lot of those strategies, Mallory, will continue into the future. I mean, there's no doubt that in-person community open houses and workshops are important, but having the ability to provide feedback when you're not able to attend those is critically important. So, our last question here is kind of an opportunity for you to share the reality of the situation, and understanding that mobility access and transportation access and parking management is sometimes hard. And we'd be interested to hear, if that's the case in your community, what's making it hard for you? Is it a lack of funding? Is it a political situation? The business and community owners might not have any interest, and that could be because they need education. They didn't know why. Maybe you don't have a problem at all, and that's totally fine too. Or maybe the answer is, boy, you're already managing parking and it's all sorted out, so your communities are in a good position. A lot of diversity here, and I'm not surprised to see that politics floats to the top of the list. And in a lot of communities, the politics is what drives decisions. And so, active parking management sometimes is the hard choice, but for the right choice. And this is where the education process of the why this is important for your community, and how managing parking and how managing transportation access should be prioritized and is important, separately from people not wanting to do it. And that education process can sometimes go a long way. Other times there's just no political will, right? It could be election season. It could be the fact that it's not a priority because an elected official might have a different priority as part of their tenure. It might be that the business owners have the stronger voice. And so, those are issues that are real issues in a lot of communities face, and education is an important piece of that. Funding
Yeah.
is another challenging piece, particularly if you're in an active transportation management perspective where you don't have a paid parking infrastructure to help support and offset part of the operational costs. I mean, managing parking is not cheap. I would submit to you that managing your water and wastewater infrastructure, managing your road network also is not a cheap investment. And so those funding strategies that Mallory shared with you are some ways that are a little bit more creative than just a pay to play or pay to park or pay to access strategy might be. So, hopefully those are some strategies that you can use to think about that. Again, the no interest from the business owners and the community, I think that has a lot more to do with an educational opportunity. If we can get more customers in the door for them, we can increase their merchant revenues. I think that's one of the discussion points that changes the conversation. And yeah, it requires some habit changes for sure. And it certainly requires that we provide them an opportunity to help manage their parking access for themselves as business owners, as well as, their employees.
I'll say
Mallory, is
quickly
there
that,
anything you wanted to add to this?
yeah, I think, on the political side, I think one thing I hear frequently from communities is the way we manage parking and the way we manage transportation doesn't align with the goals that we've set and that our city council has set and that our appointed officials have set for our community. It's really easy to set goals like we want to achieve these great climate and sustainability goals, and we want to achieve this mode shift, and we want, a robust, economically vital park once walkable community. Those are great buzzwords and they're great visions, but frequently people don't really draw the line between those efforts and parking and managing parking. So that's something that we see all the time is we have these communities that come to us with these really lofty goals around what their transportation system can do for them, but simultaneously they have unmitigated parking while they're trying to manage transportation and access and achieve sustainability goals and all this. So helping your politicians see that line is so important and can really help you on your way. And on the funding side too, a lot of you're maybe not actively managing parking, but you're paying for the parking system, believe me. It's just not visible in your budget. It's shepherded under a lot of different budgets. And I think Wade commented about, where it's located, police, general services, community development, streets, public works. That money is coming from somewhere to manage your system, including your right of way, street sweeping, just all these things. So when you think about funding, how much are you losing from paying for a system that's really not doing anything or contributing to your community's goals? I think it's really important to take stock of that.
Yeah, agree. And I think, this has been really good to hear from each of you on where you are. Again, I hope this demonstrates through this engagement exercise that you're not alone in some of the challenges, and you're not alone in the success stories you have either. So you may not know and have a strong network with other parking and access managers, but know that you're not alone, and know that there are communities like you that have some of the same challenges. And if we can help connect you with other communities, that are your light communities, your peer communities, your aspirational communities, you heard a cool program, let us help you connect each other. That's one of our goals. And in this industry, we're passionate about it. And, we're excited for you to spend time with us today. And hopefully you can take some of these strategies back to your constituents, whether it's interdepartmental, elected officials, or your community. If you have questions, Mallory and I will stick around as long as need be to chat through those, either one-on-one or in a group setting. If now is not the appropriate time, please don't hesitate to follow up with either of us. Office, cell phone, email, whatever's great for you. You can catch us on LinkedIn if you want to connect with us as well. And make sure to check out our website for other valuable blog posts and articles that are focused on this. So with that, we'll conclude the formal portion of today's webinar. Again, we will email a link out for you to be able to watch this and share this with others in your community that you think is important. Otherwise, we'll open it up for questions if there are any, or open discussion topics.